Hello, welcome back to Marathon Man, where I go through Doctor Who from the very beginning, and you join me at the debut of possibly Doctor Who's greatest writer. For whatever reason, this story makes me feel like I'm watching the Doctor Who that William Hartnell inhabited. Now, fairly inevitably, with the regime shift and the change from Hartnell to Troughton, so too did the show kind of like shift its identity to carve out an era that was distinct from what came before, but which retained enough that it could still be considered Doctor Who. It was Doctor Who through a different lens, basically. But when I watch the Krotons, I feel a little bit like Doctor Who's taken its glasses off. We get so few stories which feel like a Troughton within a Hartnell story that Highlanders is probably the most cited one because of its pure historical status. But I think the Krotons has got like the aroma of a First Doctor story, and that it's almost pleasingly soothing, and it's probably why I think this story's got quite a lot of charm. It's daft, almost to the point of cringy, but sometimes that's just what you need, you know? I've never disliked this story, but how much I like it has always differed. And I think this is one of those Doctor Who stories where how much you like it depends on your mood. Now, I know its reputation is less than stellar, but last time around I liked it more than The Invasion. That was a funny old marathon. And while I can see why the preceding Cybermen epic will appeal to a lot more people, because, you know, it did to me this time around, and while this story has fallen a few notches, I do still feel like its proximity to The Invasion kind of means the Krotons gets a little bit unfairly overlooked. And there's a lot to enjoy here. First of all, its daftness comes off as a much needed tonic rather than an embarrassment. The Krotons themselves, in another context, would be shockingly inadequate. Here, I find myself liking their daft voices and their spinny heads. Their design isn't going to win any awards, and it's obviously not going to rival the Daleks for longevity, but I have to say, it all goes down quite well. Now, you might shout hypocrite at me so soon after disparaging the Quarks. It's just that I think the Quarks' silliness damaged the Dominators, whereas the Krotons' silliness actually helps this story. Robert Holmes gives them really mundane dialogue, which, given what we know of Robert Holmes, must have been a deliberate decision. Discussing the differences between Gons and not Gons in the self-important exclamatory tones of a Doctor Who monster works both as a joke and a refreshing change. That what they're discussing involves using a made-up term like Gond over and over and over again only adds to the absurdity of it, which the script, winningly underplays. There are elements of Robert Holmes' typical wit that are woven throughout this story. Like the scientist who's never worked with acid before because of his oppressor's strict rules and him trying to work it out as he goes along. That's just lovely. And Robert Holmes is one of the best Doctor Who writers, I think, at world building. I always think of the opening of The Sunmakers. It's a long way off yet, but it gets so much establishing done in just a few moments, and it really shows what the man was capable of. And it's in evidence here as well. The Gon's backstory is made apparent but not forced, and it makes for quite a good backdrop. Their enslavement 1,000 years previously at the hands of the Silver Men. Now, is that teasing that we're going to see the Cybermen again so soon? Well, it explains the behaviour of the Gons and their reverence for the unseen Krotons. Terms like learning hall are brilliant in their apparent simplicity, which, the scholarly terming of such a place, pulls on all the memories of being a schoolchild. The set timetable, the uniform, the importance of having to pass exams to prove worth, which, when applied to grown adults, such as we see in the Gon City, comes with undertones of propaganda and subterfuge. It just doesn't feel right, and we can see that these people have been taken for a ride. It's unnerving in a really clever way, and as with every time I've watched the Krotons since first seeing it over 20 years ago, I can't understand why this one isn't more highly thought of. And I only say this because I know its reputation, it seems to me to be quite meagre. And even though I might not have gelled with this story as much this time around, I still think it's unfairly maligned. See, I've seen it enough and had such wildly different experiences each time, yet those constants sort of remain, and it's because of those constants that gives me what I feel like is like a firm ground to stand on when appraising it. And I still think those strengths are valid. And its reputation, like I said, is so paltry that even though I did enjoy it less this time around, I still think that it's underrated. It still zips along nicely, even structurally. You know, I find very little actually to complain about. It's just more of an atmosphere thing. Sometimes I find a groove with it, and other times, like this one, less so. But something big and something different happens in each of the 4 episodes, and that means that none of those 4 episodes feel superfluous. I know 4 episodes are easier to fill than 6 or 8 or 10 or 12, but there have been 4 episode stories which really sort of like dragged their feet, or more criminally, contained episodes that don't advance anything. I remember Moffat being interviewed about writing the Empty Child 2-parter, and in it he talks about a scene that he had to include because the episode was running too short, and it's the scene with the typewriter which starts writing by itself. And Moffat says that scene doesn't go from A to B, it goes from A to A. It doesn't really advance the plot or anything. It's really kind of just filler. It's disguised because it's quite a good scene, but nothing really advances. But the Krotons, it feels like it keeps progressing as it goes along, and after lengthy back and forths from various bases and through various tunnels, this small luxury actually becomes quite a large comfort. The regulars are all given stuff to do as well. Jamie gets into a fight pretty much as soon as he meets somebody, which may seem like a caricature of our favourite Highlander, but it actually feeds really well into the rest of the script. That he does his thinking with his instincts rather than his smarts becomes kind of the point later on when placing him in the obligatory danger. Jibes at his intelligence from Zoe become altogether more serious in this story when it could literally kill him. I think what I'm saying is that I kind of appreciate how this story makes use of the tools it has. You know, it takes the characters and it forms itself around them, which makes for a change from a lot of stories which just feel like they take place and they plonk the regulars in them. And that has the tendency to result in one of them being given shorter shrift than the others. But when it happens this way round, they all play their part really well because a kind of synergy forms between story and character. And if Jamie is served well, despite being called thick and so on, then Zoe continues to go from strength to strength. Now, when I finished the story, I took a moment to think, and I honestly don't think that Wendy Padbury has dropped the ball once since joining the show. I might have seen more of its shonkiness on this viewing, but I still probably would say that The Krotons might be Zoe's best story yet. In the same way that I said The Sensorites was Susan's, I don't think The Sensorites was the best story of those first 7, but it was the best story for Susan. Likewise, The Krotons is not the best story to feature Zoe, but I do think it's Zoe's best story. When the Doctor claims that he and Zoe want to take a look around and then she replies,
"Oh, do we?"
It's this cheekiness among the pluckiness and the intelligence that are really carving her out to be one of the best companions yet. When she tries out the machine, Padbury is really on point, showing how chuffed Zoe is that she feels like the Krotons are pleased with her. Now this feeds back into that unnerving quality that the learning all has. When you get a merit mark or a house point or whatever it was at school, that feeling translated to adults can only be mind games. It's nicely horrible.
The Doctor's almost as clever as I am.
At least for me, she doesn't even come across as remotely arrogant saying that. Unlike Victoria, she never needed any re-evaluation from me, but that hasn't stopped me from just liking her even more anyway. Patrick Troughton is also on the ball all of the way through, with plenty of fantastic lines that demonstrate that absolutely yes, Robert Holmes knows how to write for the Doctor.
Yes, well, Zoe is something of a genius, of course. It can be very irritating at times.
Like Hartnell before him, Troughton has a knack for building up real relationships and believable friendships with his companions. And that rapport with Zoe is probably the most optimal it's been since she joined. He instantly does the test so that Zoe doesn't have to go into the machine alone, and it's another example of the Doctor looking out for his friends. It also affords Troughton one of his more recognisably doctory moments with his beautiful
Now go away and don't fuss me. Now come back, what's this? It's all right, I know.
cracking stuff. And when in that machine, the Doctor and Zoe, plus Jamie, when he eventually gets in there, they feel like they're in real danger. They look like they're in a heck of a lot of pain. And so, despite all of the the wit and the quirkiness that run through this story, there is jeopardy as well, which is no small feat when the Krotons look and sound like they do. And at the story's conclusion, the Doctor and Zoe collectively concoct a beautiful ruse to buy time by arguing about where to stand. And this, I think, is conclusive proof that it's almost Robert Holmes' greatest victory with this story, because at the end of it, he kind of proves that it was meant to make you laugh all the way through. It's like a final punchline. The big climax is obviously a staple of storytelling, but the fact that Holmes sort of like undercuts his first one with sort of like comic overtones that are so befitting of the lead character, it just shows you what a knack Robert Holmes had for both the character and the show he was writing for. Just like a deep understanding of it. No wonder he went on to write as much of it as he did. Now, while it sounds like I'm going into bat for the Krotons with quite some vigour, I'm really only sticking up for what I perceive to be an underdog. There have been viewings where like I would sort of like put my back into sticking up for it. Now, yeah, maybe this time I didn't quite get as much from it, but I still don't think it's deserving of the reputation that it has, which I've always perceived to have been like quite lousy. I get the impression that people really don't like this one, and I don't know. I think like it's all right. It's an unchallenging, breezy 4 episodes of Doctor Who. 231 of those have passed now, and I'm getting ready to bid farewell to the second Doctor. Now, like the first Doctor, I'm not really ready to say goodbye to him. Unlike the first Doctor, the closer we get to the end of the second Doctor, I've got a creeping feeling that he didn't really get the era he deserved.
Now go away and don't fuss me. Now come back, what's this? It's all right, I know.
Selris is pretty arch. As ever, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this crazy Kroton talk, then you know how YouTube works. Please do hit the like button and share it far and wide. And what do you think of this story? Is it unfairly maligned, or is it right to be so derided? Is Robert Holmes' debut script a dud, or is it every bit as imaginative as his future work on the show? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you back here soon for a rematch with the Ice Warriors. So if you don't want to miss that, hit the subscribe button, clang the cloister bell, and we'll team at to the moon.